What's up, guys? Thanks so much for clicking on the video. My name is Leah, and let's recap and review Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. This is season 6, episode 2. It pains me to say it, but Bobbiana got baby gorgeous, girl. Oh, Lisa, she got you. She won this battle. Now, will she win the war? We got to keep watching. But Miss Bobbiana got baby gorgeous. So let's talk about it in this review. All right, y'all. So before we get into the video, I just want to be honest. I am not feeling so great. My eyes are puffy and itchy. And like I said, I just don't feel so great. I think it's due to the seasons changing, which I'm excited because I love fall. So I'm down for the seasons to change. But here in my state, the weather can't pick a mood because the day will start off like cold and wet because it's either rained before or it's just chilly, and then in the middle of the day, it will be 78 degrees, like a solid 78 degrees, and you need to put on shorts and in a t-shirt. So I think my body is just like, girl, we're trying to regulate, but we can't keep up with the weather. So I wanted to do this video so I don't get too far behind in my videos. So just wanted to give y'all the heads up. But let's get into this spicy corner. All right, y'all. So I don't have anything to talk to you guys about in this spicy corner, but I did do a standalone spicy corner. So I'll put the thumbnail on the screen if you are interested in listening to what I have to say. In that spicy corner where I talked about Bronwyn being on Watch What Happens Live, Andy's response about Jen Shaw coming back or not, as well as we get into Mary's feelings about all of the ladies. Check that video out. The link will be down below. All right. So let's get into this video. All right, y'all. So let's get into this review. So it opens up and the girls are still camping. We actually see them wake up in the RV. And honestly, if I was Meredith or Bronwyn, because I don't know where Brittany slept, but we saw where Angie and Mary slept in a bed together. Heather and Whitney slept in a bed together. But then Bronwyn and Meredith were sleeping in like the reclining chairs. So they never showed where Brittany slept. Either way, I'd had an attitude if I was Bronwyn or Meredith, because I toss and turn throughout the night sometimes, and I would have been pissed. Like, if you don't give me a bed, something where I can like sprawl out, no, this looks uncomfortable. Meredith basically says, last night was kind of crazy, but like the network wasn't going to let us die. It's too much of a liability. And that got a laugh out of me. Honestly, I'm not convinced that production wasn't like 5 or 10 feet behind them. Because my thing about it is, was production there when they were recording each other, when they were freaking out and screaming? Or did they just go off on their own and then decided to come back? Either way, I was like, this feels like a setup. They actually wake up. They have a beautiful view of the mountain and the lake and everything. They actually see a herd of cows and everyone's looking at it and brushing their teeth and reminiscing and things of that nature. We find out that Heather can't spit anymore because she gets Botox in her lips. Girl, I don't know why, because I thought Botox tightens your lips, but wouldn't it be filler because most people want plump lips? So I don't get why you would get Botox in your lips to, like, I don't know. I don't get cosmetic like procedures done, so I could be wrong. We then actually see them cooking on a griddle, and I was like, where was that the night before? Like, did production go and get them a griddle? Or did Angie forget that they had a griddle in the RV somewhere? But they're trying to eat steak and potato, like I think it was steak and eggs. I was about to say steak and potatoes, but I think they were trying to eat steak and eggs. Bronwyn was doing a horrible job cooking the steaks. Let Mary tell it. She was like, girl, you don't know what you're doing. And then even Bronwyn said in her confessional, like, you should be concerned about my culinary skills because I don't really cook at the house like that. She said I wouldn't even eat something that I touch. And I said, oh, girl. So Mary kept chastising Bronwyn, and then eventually they let Meredith take hold of it. But I was just like, why are y'all eating steak in the morning? Like, granted, I've had steak and eggs for breakfast at a nice restaurant before, but I'm like, when going camping, I would think y'all would just need like sausage patties and, eggs. And I know some people don't eat pork, but there are chicken patties and like turkey patties and things of that nature. That to me would be easier to cook than a steak, because I'm someone that likes my steak well. Like, I still want to see a little bit of pink in there, not a lot, a little bit, okay? So I wouldn't have ate that because it looked bad to me. So we see the ladies sit in a circle and they're eating breakfast together. So one of the women starts a conversation by asking Heather, "How are your girls doing?" We find out that Heather's youngest daughter, Annabelle, is about to go to college, and Heather is ready for it to happen. Heather is ready to be an empty nester and experience life without being a full time mom all the time. We find out that Heather basically has been taking care of her kids by herself since the divorce. She talks about how in the church, women are basically taught at an early age that your job is to be a mother or a wife. Any other ambitions beyond that is practically a sin, pretty much. So Heather just talks about how a lot of the time she feels like things were her fault. And she was just like, it was a lot to deal with, but she is ready for this era of her life to be over. She says, I've had the kids 100% of the time, raising them by myself. She was like, the girls never had an overnight stay with their father. She was like, she had 100% of them all the time. And she was like, unless they had like a fun visit with their dad once a week, he wasn't really doing anything pretty much. And she was just like, this era in my life was really hard, like extremely hard. And she was like, I had to act like everything was normal and grit my teeth and bear it. So I'm really ready for this to be over. So then Angie basically said, that should be the best years of your life. Like, I hate that you went through that, because you should have enjoyed every aspect and every moment of it. um you then end up hearing Bronwyn say, "Oh, Heather," and I feel like that's where Bronwyn messed up, because at first, if I was Heather and I already don't really like you being like, "Oh, Leah," I would think you was about to say something disrespectful, or you was about to try me. But listening to Bronwyn, I was like, okay, no, she was just wanting to share and connect with Heather. But I was like, girl, you should have not started off the conversation, because in my brain, I was like, "Ooh, girl, you about to be condescending," because that's what it sounded like to me. Okay, but she basically talks about how she says, she obviously took a very different track with her daughter Gwen. She says, I feel like I'm the exact opposite to Heather, where she was like, Gwen graduates in October and, she needs to leave. Like, she needs to go on and like start her own life. But instead, I moved her boyfriend into my house, or our house, her and Todd's house, to keep her around longer. Mind you, I said, girl, I know my family would never. And I'm trying to think, if I had a boyfriend at 17 or 18 years old, would my parents allow that boy to come stay with us? No, no, they would. My boyfriend would have to be like in some dire strengths. Like, it would have to be like, CPS, he needed somewhere to stay type energy before my family ever allowed a boy to come stay in my house. Especially if they knew, like if my parents knew that we liked each other. Yeah, no. So Bronwyn talks about how she is not prepared for Gwen to move out. And she's talking about this in her confessional. We actually see a flashback of Gwen and the boyfriend. Gwen cut her hair similar to Bronwyn's. It's kind of cute. She says, I'm scared. She basically says, I'm supposed to be living this fabulous life once she leaves. And Bronwyn basically says, but what if I don't make something fabulous when she leaves? She was like, I don't really know who I am if I'm not Gwen's mom. And that was sad to hear, because it's so common with women that the moment some women have a baby, they like immerse themselves totally in their children, that they forget that they were a fully realized human being with like ideas, dreams and aspirations and goals and hobbies, that they just like they let all of that fall by the wayside. And I'm just like, you should keep a piece of yourself that is selfish, where you still indulge yourself in your own dreams and aspirations and wants and needs, because it's weird to me, even when I look at people that get married, and I can't even say that it's all women. Majority of them is women, but I've seen men be that way too, where it's like everything you have to do with your wife. And it's like, yeah, your wife should be able to do stuff by herself, and so should you. Like, yes, you two are a unit, but like, girl, we got to break apart a little bit and still maintain friendships. Because I've learned that having goals, hobbies, and things of that nature when you're in a relationship is what keeps a relationship lasting so long. Because totally depending on somebody for one thing to meet every need in your life ends up very poorly and toxically. So I hope Bronwyn does figure that out. She's only 40, so she got time. Also, a thought popped into my head when I was watching this. I was like, are you also saying that you're not ready for Gwen to go because you're afraid of what it's going to be like if it's just you and Todd? Because we saw the cracks last season. So I'm like, are you afraid that your buffer will be gone? Because a lot of parents are like that, even in same sex relationships, where it's like if you have all these kids or just one child, you two both enmesh yourself in that child's life so much that it's like, this is what we have in common and this is what is keeping us together. And then when that child goes off to college or moves out of the house, or starts to becoming like a fully realized adult, and they no longer depend on the mom or the dad, or the moms or the dads, you know what I'm saying? Um, Relationships break apart because it's like you two never maintained or tried to cultivate your own relationship beyond the child. So I'm like, is she also worried about that? Either way, we hope Bronwyn get it together. She basically tells the women in the circle that she's pretty much insecure about Gwen leaving. She's just kind of like, I don't think I have done enough for Gwen in order to let her go off and be on her own. So then Heather ends up saying, well, I feel like you're trying to tell me I don't love my kids. And you could tell that Bronwyn was like, that's not what I meant. She was like, no, like, I just wish you wouldn't question what you did as a mom, because I think what you did was great. Like, you did what you did. And so Heather's like, I don't question it. I don't question it. Honestly, for me, I don't think Bronwyn meant any harm by what she said, but I do feel as though if you already know this person doesn't like you and you start off a conversation being like, oh, Heather, I would feel like you're about to be hella condescending to me. So my defenses are already up. I just feel like maybe she should have entered the conversation differently, but I don't think she was chastising Heather. I just think she was trying to relate and connect with her. And Heather just wasn't open to receiving it because she don't like Bronwyn. So Whitney chimes in and she says, I wish I could be a stay-at-home mom, but I can't. And she starts to get emotional. She was like, I really just want to stay home with my kids, but like, I still have to figure out this money situation. She ends up saying, like, this is the first time that like a business has ever failed for her this badly. She says in her confessional, she said pretty much, when the business started, it was wildly successful. They went in on everything, and then next thing you know, the business plummeted. So then we actually see a flashback of her talking to Justin, and she's very emotional, where she was just like, I'm not coping really well because this is like really hard for me because nothing I have ever done has been this bad. And then Justin is pretty much like, well, maybe this is just to like teach us something as a marker. Now, I will say this. The Wild Beauty situation, and the reason why people were calling it an MLM, is because Whitney allegedly partnered with this one brand called Sola People, which is a well-known MLM. And that's where she started to get those accusations and things of that nature. And, there's been a lot of anti-MLM content that has been popping up on social media to stop people from getting into predatory contracts. So I feel like that is where Whitney lost herself, is you partner with a brand that already had a lot of scrutiny on it, thinking that like maybe your public persona would shield you from it. But girl, and I think that's also why when she came out, and I talked about this in the last review in the Spicy Corner, saying that Wild Rose Beauty is now back to where it was began, like it's finally back in her hands because it's no longer attached to the solar people. Okay. So then Mary speaks up and she was just like, I think that Heather, you're amazing. Like, I don't know how I would be able to take care of Robert Jr. by myself, and he's only one without Robert Sr. So she was like, what you did is amazing. So then Whitney ends up asking Mary, so how is Robert Jr.? And Mary basically says, we taking it day by day. They flash back to the scene where Robert tells Mary about his addiction. And she was like, he's doing the best that he can day by day. We know he went to a 30-day rehab treatment, but it seems like he's still struggling with very highs and with, I won't say very highs, but where a lot of highs and low, you know? And pretty much we see Mary in a new confessional where she basically says that Robert Sr. basically told Robert Jr., bro, we're not babysitting you. Like, if you want a better life, you have to take hold of it. So she was like, we have given him the tools to make better decisions. So we just have to basically trust that he'll make better decisions and deal with this situation, on his own correctly. So we hear Angie basically tell the girls, thank y'all for coming on the trip, but that's a wrap on, camping, or you can't even call that glamping. Basically sleeping in an RV. So pretty much we end up seeing Tegan again, or Teague. He's trying to drive the RV, but it's stuck in the snow, like it's legit stuck. And so Mary is like, I'm not getting out and pushing nothing. She was like, I'm not pushing no RV. So Mary sits in the car while the rest of the women are shoving the back of the RV. And Mary's like, come on, y'all. And they eventually get the car or the RV out of the snow. But I was like, yeah, it's time to go. I would have been married. I'm not pushing no RV. I ain't want to be in an RV. Okay. So the next scene we have is of Lisa and Heather. We finally get to see baby gorgeous. Okay. And while Heather's on her way to the meetup, she's on the phone with Angie, who she now calls Chirps. Girl, you can come up with a better nickname. Go talk to Marisol. But we find out that Amy, their friend or a person that is a well-known socialite in Utah, is throwing a celebration party and everyone's invited. Heather even says, like, in Utah, we really don't have socialites. It's really like the church and basically nothing else. But if we did have a socialite, Amy and Jim, but mainly Amy would be our socialite. She throws fabulous parties and things of that nature. She lives in this wonderful house and she decided to invite everybody. So we finally see Heather make her way to the restaurant. This scene was hilarious in the beginning for several reasons. One, the black lady that everyone has pointed out, who was eyeing Lisa and Heather up and down. I felt like she was doing that mainly because of the placement of where Lisa and Heather were sitting. They were directly in the middle of the room, and they have to sign off, or like people sign off on having their likenesses on camera. So I wonder if she watches the show or if she doesn't watch the show and she was wondering like who was coming to film, and when she saw that it was Heather and Lisa, she was like, this who y'all filming? That's the energy it gave to me. But also the waiter, the way his eyes were bugged out, I was like, sir, are you okay? Do you need some water? Like, do you need to lay down? When he was like, are you ready? His eyes were huge. I was like, sir, calm down, calm down. But they greet each other and they sit down, and Lisa basically brings up, like, I heard you guys went on the trip. How was the trip and where did you go? And Heather was like, no, it was actually a fun trip. We went to Provost Canyon and we slept in an RV. And Lisa's like, I could not picture Mary sleeping in an RV. And Heather's like, well, no, she did it. It was fine. And so then Lisa's like, so what did y'all talk about while I wasn't there? And Heather says in the confessional, basically like, girl, I'm not gonna not tell Lisa what went down. I'm going to tell her the truth. So she basically was like, well, your name came up a couple of times while we were there. Heather basically says Bronwyn dropped a lot of things about you, all this research that she did on your business. And they flash back to when Heather and Bronwyn somewhat got into it when they were sitting at the picnic table. And then Lisa's just taking it all in. And Heather was like, it's clear that she was there just to annihilate you. You know what I mean? And then she goes on to say, she was like, Heather says, I think you need to squash this. Like, you need to confront this head on and squash this information that's being said about you. So then Lisa ends up saying, like, there's nothing really to squash because the cases are dismissed and the other one will get dismissed. She pretty much says, I don't understand why she dug up something that happened like 15 years ago. Like, that's not something that's important that needs to be talked about. Lisa, this confessional girl, I don't know what was going on with your eye makeup, but it was a fool. It was a fool. So she basically, Lisa's going on and on about how the lawsuits were dismissed. And then she also says, no one sues the bottom, bitch. They always go for the top. And that's similar to what Karen said, in order to owe thousands, you got to make thousands when she had her press conference. So I chuckled at that. Okay. So Heather's like, so what happened? Like, what is this lawsuit? And that's when Lisa explains, this is an old business partner from 15 years ago. And she was like, these are baseless, malicious, and dumb claims. She was like, the case is going to get dismissed. So then Lisa ends up saying, I don't own the same kind of business like anybody else in this friend group. She was like, I live a very different life from all of you. So then Heather was like, girl, you do not live a different life than all of us. Like, let's not. She was like, I do. Like, Lisa's like, everybody knows I do big things. And so then Heather says in her confessional, this is Lisa's problem. She makes these little elitist things or these digs to make herself feel bigger. And honestly, listening to Lisa, she only said this comment, in my opinion, because she was hurt to find out that everyone was trashing her business. So this was her way of getting back at the ladies. But we know Lisa does not live a different life than none of these ladies. Like, she's living about the same amount of life as everybody else. But if I was Heather, I would have checked Lisa in that moment way more than just saying, girl, Lisa, your life isn't different. I told her, I'd have been like, I understand that you're hurt, but don't disrespect me, because I feel like what you're saying is disrespectful. Like, challenge her in that moment instead of saying this in the confessional. Okay. So basically, Heather's in her confessional saying, girl, give us credit for what we do. So then Lisa ends up asking, like, did anybody other than you defend me? And she was like, what about Meredith and Angie? And so Heather lies, like blatantly lies, and says Meredith was Meredith. So then Lisa was like, oh, so she basically said nothing pretty much. And so Heather says, she defended you at first around the picnic table, and then Angie just started to kind of pile on. And my thing about it is, Meredith did speak up for Lisa. In my opinion, we saw her tell Angie that her comparison to compare Lisa to Jen Shaw didn't make sense. We also heard her say, like, she's not doing anything criminal. And we heard her say that she wasn't comfortable having these conversations without Lisa, and all of you should be talking to Lisa, not behind her back. So I don't get why Heather is lying on Meredith. Like, Heather does this thing where it gives like there can only be one. Like, she has to be someone's sole friend, because it was like, this was an opportunity for you to just be honest. The only thing she was honest was Angie piling on, because in my opinion, Angie was piling on. Bronwyn was putting all this information out there, and Angie was like, yeah, I read it. And some would say it's close to Jen Shaw. So you did add to the conversation. And Angie, your slip is showing, because girl, you had all that bass in your voice at that picnic table, but when Lisa confronted you at that party, girl, you was timid. And I was like, Angie, what's going on? What's going on? So then Lisa ends up saying, so I thought me and Angie were good, so I don't understand like why she wouldn't like defend me. So then Lisa ends up saying, it sounds like you were the only one that defended me. And she was like, I just think it's disappointing that. And then she kind of cuts herself off and she starts to get emotional. And she's like, I just think it's disappointing that Angie jumped in. And she was like, and Meredith didn't say a word. And she just starts to like cry at the table. She was like, like, that's kind of pathetic that no one actually like stood up for me. And so Heather's like, it's okay to say that you're hurt, because Lisa keeps saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. So then it goes to Lisa's confessional where she is crying even more so, where she was like, like, I'm just frustrated and upset. She's just like, I like giving 100% for our businesses, missing critical moments of our lives. And it's not like, and they act like it's no big deal to like rip down my business. So it goes back to her sitting at the table and she's like, wiping her eyes, saying, it's stupid for them to bring up this stuff. But she was like, if they can dissect, my life, then I can dissect everybody else's life. So it is what it is at this point. And here's my thing. Lisa seems genuinely hurt that Angie and Meredith didn't have her back because it seems as though Lisa really does care about her relationship with those two women to a certain degree. I think she cares more about Angie's relationship than Meredith, but I hate the fact that Heather lied to her because we did see Meredith stick up for Lisa, but Angie was piling on, so Heather didn't lie about that. I do wonder though, why did Angie pile on? Unless there was something that happened that I didn't see take place on like Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. Lisa and Angie have kind of been like in a neutral, like a stalemate kind of situation. So I don't get why she felt the need to add her 2 cents. I do think there's something going on with Lisa from the confessional down to how she looked when she was riding to Amy's house. Like she looked genuinely nervous, like anxiety ridden. So I feel like there's something else going on with Lisa that we don't know about or that might be shown to us as the season continues on. Maybe it is her situation with John, but Lisa being this emotional, and I don't think those were fake tears because like I said, I feel like I can tell when Lisa is fake crying, but something is going on. So the next scene we have is of Bronwyn and Whitney going skiing and snowboarding. Whitney definitely gives a snowboarder and Bronwyn definitely gives a skier. I think I've told y'all this before that I've been skiing. I really didn't like it that much, to be honest. Like my ankles were sore as hell afterwards. But I do think it's something that everybody should experience, going snowboarding, skiing, snow tubing. Like it's fun for the most part, but that's just how I feel about it. They end up like, stopping at this one part of the ski area and they just start to have this conversation where Whitney ends up asking Bronwyn, so how did you enjoy the trip? And Bronwyn basically says she had a good time on the trip. She liked the fact that she was able to have conversations and get to know people better than she has before. And it was nice. Whitney ends up saying that she actually loved the fact that Heather and Bronwyn were actually getting along. Then Bronwyn kind of interjects and she's like, well, I feel like we were getting along until the whole Annabelle situation. And she took what I said very negatively. And she also says she feels like her and Heather take like 2 steps forward, like baby steps, and then we take a bunch of steps back because she ends up pissing her off. And she's like, I be trying not to piss the lady off, but I piss her off. So then Whitney ends up saying, well, you need to be more direct. When you see that happening, you need to tell her like, hey, I'm just trying to be supportive. I'm not trying to be negative towards you. So then the conversation kind of pivots to where Bronwyn ends up thanking Whitney for having her back at the picnic table when she brought up Lisa's lawsuits. She said something to the effect of like, oh, I really appreciate you having my back. So then Whitney was like, well, yeah, it was just frustrating in that moment seeing them try to like basically say that what you were doing was wrong when it's like Lisa can bring up the things that she heard about us online. So why can't we do it for us? Like, why are you coming for us? Like, if you're going to come for us, you should be prepared for us to bring up the stuff that we see online about you. So then Bronwyn brings up how, Lisa's being sued by 5 people. One of the people that she's being sued by has evidence of like a text message of her like knowing about this money, basically saying that pretty much she's not denying that she took this money that and she hasn't paid this person back. It continues on with her saying that like in the court documents it's she acknowledges the money situation, and they do show the court documents where one of the statements in the the document says that Lisa sent like a face palm emoji, and then in capital letters it said overwhelmed. And then Brahma goes on to say, and she doesn't want John to know about it either. So then Whitney is like, John doesn't know about it, and her eyes get like really big, like she's really surprised that John doesn't know. And so they do show the court documents where it says something to the effect of like, John Barlow, her husband, and Vita Tequila other principal not be aware of the Vita Tequila lack of sufficient funds to purchase product or pay legal bills. So Bronwyn goes on to continue to talk, where Whitney is just kind of like, so is this the guy that Angie was talking about? And it flashes back to the reunion, and they talk about what Angie tweeted out saying that Lisa gets like her Air Max card paid off by some mystery guy in Park City and things of that nature. And so Braun was like, that could be the guy. So then she also says, it's like she's so worried about my finances and all of that stuff. She let Brittany call me a gold digger last season, but yet you're taking money from some random man and not your husband. At least I'm taking money from my husband. It's kind of weird. And this is why I'm like, girl, Bronwyn, you are really pressed that lady busted you out about that necklace, because this is the second time of her mentioning like finances and Lisa being worried about what she has in her bank account, because she said it on the first episode when they were sitting at that picnic table, where she was like, Lisa needs to be worried about what she got going on, not worried about the jewelry that I bought or something like that. Now you're saying like she needs to be worried about her finances, not about what I got going on. And even when they argue at Amy's house at the party at the end of the episode, she is telling Lisa to pay her bills and, worry about that and about an Amex card and all. So it's like, girl, you are really upset about that. And I've seen a lot of people try to bring up, well, no, she's really upset about Gwen. No, she's not. She's not upset about Gwen and Lisa talking to Gwen's family, to be honest, because I think if that was what Bronwyn was really upset about, she would have voiced that. No, she's upset about getting busted out for lying. And she didn't think Lisa would have known that information, and she gotcha. So Bronwyn came in this season prepared to really go toe to toe and battle with Lisa. So she did her research, and I can't fault somebody for doing their research, but I do think Bronwyn should be careful, especially aligning herself with Whitney, because the way that Whitney was looking at her and not really adding too much 2 cents in about this situation. Because this is my thing. Whitney does not like Lisa, but the fact that when Bronwyn revealed that John doesn't know that about this money situation, and Whitney looked genuinely surprised, and then she added, was this the guy that Angie was alluding to in Park City? And Bronwyn was like, it could be. She didn't look like pleased. It looked like, ooh. Like it was more so like, dang, like this might be a little too far. Like, yeah, I want to get at this girl, but maybe not that hard. I'm also looking at Bronwyn like, I understand you want to get Lisa back, but are you prepared for, if you do win this war with Lisa and you totally decimate her this entire season, that those women are going to be coming for you next? Because that's a possibility that could happen. Like once you take down somebody that they feel like is the evil or the villain of the group, it creates like a power vacuum in the sense. And then the person that either takes their spots becomes the villain, or somebody else becomes the villain. But most of the time, it's the person that takes them down on Housewives, unless they just have a strong like fan base or a strong connection with the women on the cast. But I don't know. If I was Bronwyn, I would be careful. So next we have this scene with Mary and Robert Jr. It's nighttime, and pretty much you see Robert go into Mary's room, and she's kind of doing like her like nightly routine. And I think she ends up asking him like, so how are you doing? And he's like, I'm doing all right. He was just like, I just feel like I'm at a standstill right now. He's like, I'm not in a dark place, but like it feels like I'm just stagnant right now. And Mary ends up saying like, well, this wasn't going to be like an easy walk for you. It's going to take some time for you to be in a better place. And he was like, yeah, he ends up saying, I just didn't expect this to be so like scary and isolating, because the friends that he used to party with, he no longer can associate himself with because it will lead him back to doing drugs. And Mary says, well, we you had to stop hanging out with them so you wouldn't go back. And then Mary also expresses that she doesn't want him to feel isolated or anything of that nature, but you have to break those bonds with people that you bonded over drugs with. And so then he ends up saying, I just feel like I'm getting stimuli from other places. And Mary, you could see the fear in her eyes, kind of like, okay, what other places? Like, you going back to the drugs? Like, what's going on? And he was like, I'm getting it from food. And she's like, okay. And then he said, also, I am using drugs. And she was like, okay, what, like, is it as bad as what you were doing before? And he was like, no, I'm just smoking. Basically, he's smoking weed, pretty much. And she's like, okay, did you smoke today? And he was like, yeah. So he was just like, I keep beating myself up because I'm not completely like off of like drugs and things of that nature, and it's not perfect. And then Mary basically says, well, every day is not going to be easy. So then Mary says in her confessional that she feels like Robert Jr.'s whole life she was a helicopter parent, and now she's trying to take a different approach where she's like hands off to allow him to make his own decisions, so he can deal with it. And then they end up showing the information needed for somebody if they are dealing with, mental health issues or substance abuse. I actually felt really bad for Robert Jr. because it does have to be extremely isolating to cut off your friend group, knowing that these were probably people that you confided in. Y'all had really fun and cool times together, but y'all can't be together because you would relapse. And probably it would be even harder because you're around your friends and you feel more comfortable. He, to me, just needs to find a job that he really is passionate about, and maybe that would give him purpose to not go back, and then open him up to like talking to people and gaining a new friend group. He also need to divorce that girl that's his wife, because if she not clean, then he not gonna be clean, to be honest. It's just, yeah, I feel bad for him because that has to be very lonely, and like I said, isolating, because I think Robert Jr. is only like 23 or 24, but this is around the age when people graduate college, decide if they're going to get a master's degree or go into the workforce. You have people going to trade school, backpacking across, America, or going overseas and backpacking. Like, people start volunteering or doing like internships and things of that nature. Like, he probably does feel like he's at a standstill, especially if he's online and comparing himself to other people. But I do hope eventually we hear positive things about him. The last time we talked about Robert Jr., he got arrested for trying to break into his wife's house through the doggy door and got, arrested by the police. I think he also got charged with like a resisting arrest or something like that. It's just a lot going on for him, and I feel for Mary, but I do think they're doing the right thing by taking a hands-off approach, because at this point he is an adult and he has to make the decision on whether or not he wants to live a clean and sober lifestyle. And there's not much your parents can do or your friends around you can do in order to force you to make that decision. You have to make it on your own.
So moving on from that scene, the next scene we have is with Bronwyn and Heather meeting up. Honestly, you can tell that Heather doesn't really want to meet up with Bronwyn, but she's going to. Bronwyn stresses in her confessional that she really wants to have a friendship with Heather, so she's hoping that this conversation they have a breakthrough. Heather basically says that she doesn't want to be annoyed with Bronwyn and she doesn't want her friendships to feel like a chore, so she's also hoping for a breakthrough. Like I've been saying, Heather and Bronwyn are really similar in my opinion because they end up ordering the same drink and I think the same meal. Honestly, Heather's reasoning for not liking Bronwyn is slightly because of Lisa. Last episode, I was like, yeah, I can see her not liking Bronwyn because, she saw through Bronwyn last season, but now it does feel like half of her reasoning for not liking Bronwyn is because of Lisa and Heather wanting to stay in Lisa's good graces. But they're talking. Bronwyn actually apologizes to Heather for Heather taking what she said when they were at the campsite in a bad way because she was like, that was not my intention. And Heather was like, well, it did kind of feel like you were trying to tell me that I wasn't a good mom. And Bronwyn was like, no, what I was trying to say is that you are a good mom, and just point out my own insecurities of me feeling like I haven't done a really good job of mothering. So that's why I'm not ready to let my daughter go. So then Heather transitions the conversation where she was like, well, my issues with you are what they are. But she was like, I also don't understand why you dug up all this information about Lisa. Heather also says that Bronwyn does a lot of word salad. I don't think she does a lot of word salad. Bronwyn says in her confessional, I do word salad, but you're friends with Big Mouth Lisa Barlow. I would say some of them do word salad, but I don't think Bronwyn is one of them, because I can pinpoint several times with Meredith, Lisa, even Mary, Angie, Whitney at times, and Heather, where they have done the whole word salad thing. So, yeah. So basically, Heather brings up, like, why'd you dig up all that information about her when you said you wanted to be cool with her? And so Bronwyn was like, well, I did that because she was talking so poorly about me online. So then Heather was like, so it was retaliatory, like you're trying to get back at her. And Bronwyn was like, well, yeah, you can call it that if that's what you want to call it. So she was just like, I think you need to have a, Heather says, I think you need to have a one-on-one with Lisa and work it out, you know? And Brahma was like, well, I don't want my relationship with you to be about Lisa. And she was like, it's not, it won't be about Lisa. And so the conversation looked like it was about to get heated. And then Heather ends up being like, do you want to be friends? Do you want to be friends? And Brahma was like, yes. And so they cheers. I don't know. I think it's pathetic that Brahma wants to be friends with Heather, because at least when Bronwyn was friends with Lisa, you could tell at some point Lisa did like Bronwyn. Heather has never really shown Bronwyn that she likes her. And it just feels like, girl, why are you chasing after somebody that doesn't really see it for you? You know, you only got to tell me once that you don't really vibe with me, and I'll leave you alone.
So let's get to the last part of the episode. So we see the ladies get to Amy's house. It's a really nice home, by the way. Everyone is happy to be there. We see the girls, greeting Amy. So that's how we know Amy was probably going to be on the show. But after the way they carried on in her house, Amy said, I will not. Yeah, I will not. We see Brittany and Jared. I was like, oh, girl, you brought Jared. I do like the fact that she had one of those drink walls where you ring the bell and then they pop out like, champagne or whatever type of alcohol you're serving. I think that's actually a cool idea. So then we see this one lady talking to Angie and Heather saying, these are all the old Park City OGs. And Heather's like, can you hook me up with somebody? And the lady's like, okay, girl, I got you. We then see Lisa. Lisa looks so nervous sitting in that car meeting up with everybody. I don't know if something is really up with her and John, but her energy was off. Like she just looked scared. So she's in her confessional talking about like she feels uneasy and she's upset. She was like, I just want to get to the bottom of what was said about me. She was like, I live in the light. Everything I do is in the light. I live my life in the light. And then she ends up saying, like, you can't destroy me, only I can destroy myself. So we see the girls basically wondering where Lisa is at. So Lisa walks in and she's like, oh, look who it is, making a grand entrance. You see everybody looking around like, oh, here we go. So then you actually see Lisa, mingling. And the first person she talks to is Meredith. And Meredith is like, you missed a crazy trip. And then Lisa ends up saying, well, Heather told me like everything when we were at lunch. She was like, so do you have anything to tell me? She was like, she told me who was a good friend and who wasn't. And then Meredith basically says, I think that you should talk to the girls because a lot of things were said and it wasn't really nice, girl. So then Brittany rolls up and Brittany immediately is like, Angie compared you to Jen Shaw. So I was like, Brittany, you couldn't wait. And Brittany said, no, I got to get this out now. So you see Bronwyn, Mary, Angie and Whitney off to the side. And I think Bronwyn is telling them, or Whitney is saying that, like, no, Angie, Brittany just told Lisa you compared her to Jen Shaw. And I was surprised that Angie was so surprised. I'm like, Angie, you were saying at that table, whatever you said about Lisa, you could tell it to her face. And why would you think that wouldn't get back to her? So Lisa is appalled. She was like, that's horrible. That's so psycho. So then in her confessional, she is like, like, you basically just called me a criminal in front of all our friends. She was like, I wouldn't even do that to somebody I hated. But then I'm like, Lisa, you did compare Bronwyn to Jen. So there's that. But she's upset. Then you have Mary on the other side saying, oh my gosh, shut up, she did not tell her that information. She was like, oh, this is a mess. So then you go back to the group with Brittany, Meredith, and Lisa, and she was like, I think Meredith's like, it's a good idea that you talk to them. So you end up seeing Lisa go over to Meredith, and no, go over to Angie and Mary, and she's like, hi Mary, hi Angie, we need to talk. So Angie looks surprised, and she's like, so I just had a conversation with Brittany, like, girl, what's up? And immediately Angie throws Bronwyn under the bus. So Angie basically is like, well, Bronwyn bought all these documents and all this stuff about you. So then Lisa is like, I doubt Bronwyn went to law school. No, she said, I don't think Bronwyn went to law school, and I doubt she went to college. You see Bronwyn looking at Lisa and Angie having a conversation. And I said, and that's why I'm saying Bronwyn should be careful as well, because the way that Angie threw Bronwyn under the bus with such ease, girl, you're new here. They not going to have that much loyalty to you. So watch your back, lady. So then the conversation continues on with Bronwyn walking up, trying to have a conversation with Lisa. And Lisa is not trying to have it. She's just like, Bronwyn, I don't want to speak to you. I don't like you. Get out of my face. And Bronwyn's like, well, Lisa, you're mad at me. You're not mad at Angie. And she was like, you hear Lisa say, you're dismissed, Bronwyn. And Bronwyn's in her confessional saying, Lisa, don't you mean, what you mean is, please, judge, please dismiss the case. That was so corny, Bronwyn. Don't ever do that again. That was so lame. Then Lisa yells out, she's loitering, which I did laugh at, because I said, girl, what? So then Meredith's like, I don't think this is a good idea. Maybe this is a conversation y'all should have at a different time. You then see the rest of the party goers kind of looking at them like, oh my God, is this how they really be acting? Like, I can't believe this is happening. It gave very, like, they were the entertainment for that night. So next thing you know, they start going back and forth. I don't really care about Jared and them, but pretty much, Bronwyn ends up saying, you talk to everybody about me, but you don't want to talk to me, Lisa. And Lisa, you can tell, was getting nervous because she kept messing with her hair. Like, I'm telling y'all, she was nervous to have this conversation, or you could tell she was uneasy. So then Bronwyn basically was like, yes, I brought up stuff that I feel like should make people question you and have pause about you. So then Lisa was like, yeah, you gout dick sucker. I said, girl, what? I'm not gonna lie. I don't know where Lisa got that from, because that wasn't even a part of the conversation. But the way I screamed when she said it, because she said it so hard, and then she doubled down on it. And then you hear Mary say, oh, this is getting nasty really quick. And I said, my God, today. Okay. And so then Brittany is like appalled. Like, she was like, oh my gosh. She was like, so then Bronwyn said, so I'm a dick sucker now? And Lisa said, no, you're a gout dick sucker. I said, Lisa, okay, girl. Okay. So then Whitney's in the confessional being like, I thought gout was in the foot. It is in the foot. So I don't even know with Lisa. So Lisa ends up saying, but you're saying there's no proof. Like, all of those things are getting dismissed. And so then basically, Lisa ends up saying that's how you get your clothes, by sucking your husband's dick. So then Bronwyn ends up saying, no, Lisa, my husband pays for my clothes because, and then Lisa's like, yeah, because you suck his dick. And that's what you brag about. And so Bronwyn says, at least my husband is paying for my clothes. Who's paying for your Amex card, Lisa? And then Lisa says, me and John. And then Bronwyn was like, no, the court document says the other guy pays for it. And Lisa's like, that's not true. And then Whitney chimes in and she was like, that is what the court documents say. And you could tell that the people that don't like Lisa were living for this. Whitney was living for it. Mary was getting her life off of it. Like, Bronwyn was really wrapping Lisa up, okay? So then Lisa starts yelling about it not being true. They start pointing fingers in each other's faces. Really, their fingers weren't even that close to each other. Brown was like, get your finger out of my face. Lisa was like, I'll do whatever I want. Then she ends up saying, you gonna start head. Lisa ends up saying, you're gonna start head nodding and bobbing and all of that stuff. And so then Brown said, worry about those lawsuits. Cash will clear those lawsuits. You know what I mean? So then they start going back and forth even harder. Bronwyn says, you called me a liar. Now I'm a dick sucker. And then she ends up asking Whitney, do you like sucking dick? And Whitney was like, yeah, because I'm married. So then Lisa's like, well, you had cracks in your marriage and that's what you were bragging about and things of that nature. So they start going back and forth. Bronwyn's in her confessional saying, my Amex card comes in a little black box, because it's a lot of pages. But Lisa will bring up a joke that you told her 5 years ago to throw it in your face. But yeah, but Bronwyn, last year you talked about your husband cheating on you and your daughter finding out and telling you that he cheated on you. So, joke or not joke, it is true. You have cracks in your marriage. So then Brown was like, every marriage has its ups and downs. So then Lisa brings up, girl, you were talking badly about him in Mexico. You know what I mean? And then Brahman was like, well, at least, I don't borrow money behind my husband's back like you do. And Lisa was like, girl, whatever. So then they start going back and forth. You could tell that like Bronwyn got the best of Lisa. And Lisa's like, those text messages aren't true. And Bronwyn's like, it's in the court documents. So then Lisa's like, she thinks she's a lawyer now. She didn't even go to college. And then Bronwyn says, I don't think I'm a lawyer. I know how to read court documents. She was like, Lisa, you should go to work and pay those effing lawsuits and off. And then it leaves with Lisa saying, girl, you're disgusting. You're a pig. And Bronwyn just drinking her champagne. Then Lisa ends up saying, I'm going to create a website to post all your lies. And then Bronwyn says, isn't that typical you to create a smear campaign online and try to ruin people? And then Whitney was like, that is true. And then Lisa just walks away. And like I said, I hate to say it, but the Bob got baby gorgeous. She did. She won this battle. Now I don't know if she gonna win the war, because when her lawsuits get brought up, because girl, you got charged with identity theft and grand theft auto. And now the case is sealed. I need to know about that. But yeah, she got her. She got her, and Lisa did not know what to do. But yeah, y'all, that is it. That is all. As always, remember to be bravely authentic. Definitely hop down in the comments below and subscribe. Like the video, and I'm out, y'all. Deuces.